Private hangar, midday. The scorching sun reflects off a luxury helicopter. Elite technicians huddle in a circle, faces pale with exhaustion. Billionaire Isabella Grant crosses her arms, her patience wearing thin as an international meeting ticks closer. In the background, Ryan Cole, a grease-stained single dad, stands quietly. His son, Evan, watches from a tool crate with silent intensity. Isabella smirks, her voice dripping with mockery. "Fix this, and I'll buy you a house." Engineers chuckle, thinking it's an impossible joke. Ryan doesn't blink or reach for a tool. He just goes, hauntingly silent, staring at the engine. The world moves on money, but Ryan Cole moves on rhythm. At 41, Ryan is a ghost in the aviation industry, a man who exists in the periphery of the roaring turbines and high-stakes deals. He is a freelance mechanic, a nomadic specialist who takes short-term contracts with no strings attached and no corporate loyalty. He lives in a small, cramped apartment in a neighborhood where the streetlights flicker, sharing every meal with his 9-year-old son, Evan. To the billionaires who hire him, Ryan is nothing more than a pair of calloused hands that smell eternally of jet fuel, hydraulic fluid, and hard labor. He is the man you call when the manuals fail, but he is also the man you never invite to the boardroom. But Ryan wasn't always a ghost hiding in the shadows of secondary hangars. 10 years ago, his name was whispered with reverence in the halls of aerospace giants. He was a lead flight systems engineer and a decorated military test technician, the kind of man who could troubleshoot a cockpit failure while flying at Mach 2. He possessed a rare, intuitive connection with metal and air. He was the guardian of the sky, the final signature that ensured the safety of the bravest pilots in the world. That life ended on a rainy Tuesday in Maryland, a day carved into his soul like a jagged wound. A tragic crash had claimed the lives of an entire flight crew during a routine test flight. Ryan had flagged a specific sensor anomaly months prior, a tiny discrepancy in the telemetry that no one else cared to notice. But his urgent reports were buried under layers of corporate bureaucracy, non-disclosure agreements, and profit-driven deadlines. The company decided the risk was statistically acceptable. The resulting explosion proved them wrong. He quit the industry that same night, haunted by a guilt that no amount of money could wash away. He chose the life of a simple mechanic, preferring the honest grime of a wrench to the blood-stained decisions of a boardroom. He chose to be a father to Evan, sacrificing his brilliance to ensure he was home every night to read a bedtime story. "Money doesn't fix mistakes, Evan," Ryan often tells his son while they work on a broken bike or a salvaged radio in their dim garage. "Only truth does, and the truth is usually found in the parts people forget to check because they are too busy looking at the price tag." Evan understands more than most children his age. He has grown up watching his father work in a deep meditative silence, a quietness that most people mistake for slowness, lack of ambition, or a simple mind. But Evan knows better. He knows that when his father is silent, he is actually listening to the heartbeat of machines, the subtle friction of gears against bearings, and the microscopic vibrations that tell the secret story of a machine's health. To Ryan, a machine is never just a pile of parts. It is a living, breathing system that demands respect. Today, that silence is being tested in the most public and humiliating way possible. Isabella Grant is a woman who uses her immense wealth to buy the only thing she cannot create: time. To her, time is the only currency that matters, and every second lost is $1 million burned in the furnace of missed opportunity. Her private helicopter, the crown jewel of the Northgate fleet and a masterpiece of modern engineering, is supposed to carry her to a merger that will define her legacy and solidify her empire for decades. But the machine is bleeding. Every time the pilots fire up the massive twin turbines, a strange, sickening vibration rattles the airframe, a shudder that starts in the tail and ripples through the cabin floor. It feels like the helicopter is trying to tear itself apart before it even leaves the ground. Isabella's lead engineers, men with PhDs from the best universities and six-figure salaries, have tried everything in their digital arsenal. They've swapped the ECU, recalibrated the laser-guided torque sensors, and run 3 separate top-tier digital diagnostics using satellites. Every screen in the hangar flashes a bright, reassuring green. The computers say the aircraft is perfect. The algorithms insist there is no fault. Yet as soon as the blades spin, the machine shudders like it's afraid to touch the sky. Isabella snaps her heels against the concrete, the sharp sound echoing like a gunshot against the metal walls. "I don't pay for excuses," she screams, her voice vibrating with a fury that makes the junior techs flinch. "I pay for results. I pay for this bird to fly. Is there anyone in this entire building who actually knows how to do their job? Or am I surrounded by incompetent children playing with toys they don't understand?" The engineers look away, staring at their expensive tablets, unable to offer anything but technical jargon and empty promises. No one dares say the word impossible to Isabella Grant because they know she'll simply replace them with someone who says yes. Ryan is the only one who doesn't look intimidated by her fury. He stands near the tail rotor, his eyes fixed on the main rotor hub, with a level of focus that borders on the supernatural. He isn't laughing at her jokes, and he isn't flinching at her anger. He is simply listening to the cooling metal of the engine, feeling the rhythm of the hangar, and waiting for the machine to speak to him in a language only he remembers. Isabella paces the hangar floor like a caged tiger, her shadow stretching long and jagged against the gleaming floor. "We have 60 minutes, she says, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper that carries more threat than a shout. "If this bird isn't in the air by then, the deal of the century evaporates, and I will personally see to it that this hangar is closed and turned into a parking lot by Monday." The chief engineer stammers, his shirt soaked through with sweat, his hands shaking so hard he can barely hold his diagnostic tool. "Isabella, we've run every protocol known to modern aviation. The software doesn't see a fault. It's a ghost in the machine. It might just be an atmospheric anomaly, a pressure differential, or a temporary sensor glitch that will clear once we reach cruise altitude." Ryan moves closer now, his presence shifting the gravity of the room in a way that makes the air feel thicker. He doesn't ask for permission, and he doesn't wait for an invitation. He walks toward the massive engine housing, his heavy work boots making a rhythmic, grounded thud on the floor that contrasts with the frantic clicking of Isabella's heels. He can hear it even without the engines running, a residue of vibration so faint, so irregular, that it's almost musical. It's a rhythmic skip, like a heart with a hidden murmur, a secret flaw hidden beneath layers of expensive carbon fiber and gold-plated wiring. He reaches out and touches the primary gearbox housing, feeling the residual heat. To the engineers, this metal is just a container for gears. To Ryan, it's a diagnostic record. He notices the way the oil has pooled near the scavenge pump. Just a few drops, almost invisible, but they tell a story of thermal expansion that the computers missed. The chief engineer sneers as Ryan leans his ear against the cold titanium. "What are you doing? Whispering to the metal? We've used ultrasonic sensors that can detect a crack in a diamond, and you think your ears are better?" Ryan doesn't look up. He is focusing on the decay rate of the sound as the internal components settle. There is a metallic ting every 4 seconds, a sign that a bearing isn't seating correctly once it cools. "When did it start?" Ryan asks, his voice raspy and deep, sounding like someone who hasn't spoken in days. The chief engineer barely glances at him, his face contorted in a sneer of pure condescension. "Get back to the landing gear, contractor. This is a systems-level failure involving integrated flight logic. We're busy with actual engineering here, not tightening rusty bolts or checking oil levels. You're polluting the diagnostic environment." Isabella stops her pacing and turns her cold, piercing gaze toward Ryan. She sees the grease on his chin, the oil-stained coveralls that have seen better decades, and the small, quiet boy sitting on the crate like a silent judge. She feels a surge of cruel, desperate frustration and decides to make him the target of her mounting stress. "Let him try," she says, her voice dripping with a sarcasm that cuts through the tension like a blade. "Since the geniuses I pay millions can't figure it out, let's see what the man with the wrench thinks. It's just a machine, right? A bit of metal and some fuel. Tell you what, Mr. Contractor, if you can make this bird fly in the next 20 minutes, I'll buy you a house. A real house. not a rental in the slums near the tracks. I'll sign the deed today, right here on this floor. I'll even throw in a college fund for your boy so he doesn't end up covered in grease like his father." The hangar erupts in snickers and muffled laughter. The engineers exchange smirks, mocking the man who thinks he can outperform their supercomputers with his bare hands and a tattered manual. Isabella leans against the limo, watching Ryan with a predatory amusement. She expects him to fumble, to look confused by the high-tech cockpit, or to ask for a manual he can't read. She wants to see him fail so she can feel superior in her anger. But Evan grips the edges of his tool crate, his knuckles turning white as he locks his eyes on his father's back. He knows that look in his father's eyes. It's the look of a man who is about to drag a dark truth into the blinding light of day. Ryan doesn't respond to the mockery, and he doesn't even look at the checkbook Isabella is casually waving in the air like a taunt. He simply walks to the fuselage and places his bare, grease-stained hand against the cold metal. He closes his eyes, blocking out the blinding lights of the hangar and the mocking noise of the crowd. He feels the resonance deep in his bones, vibrating through his palm and up his arm. It isn't a software bug, and it isn't a sensor glitch. It's a harmonic imbalance in the primary drive shaft, a microscopic, fatal flaw that only triggers when the torque loads reach a specific lethal frequency. It is a silent killer, a ticking time bomb hidden in the heart of the machine, waiting for the moment of maximum stress to explode. Ryan knows with absolute certainty that if this helicopter takes off now, it will look fine for the first few minutes. The instruments will stay green, the climb will be smooth, and the pilots will breathe a sigh of relief. And then at 500 feet, the vibration will suddenly amplify 1,000 times over in a feedback loop. The main rotors will simply shear off the mast, turning the luxury cabin into a falling brick of fire and steel. Ryan turns his head slowly to look at Isabella. He doesn't say, "I can fix it," to claim her prize. He doesn't say thank you for the offer of a new life. He just stares at her with an intensity so raw and so honest that her smirk begins to fade into a look of genuine, creeping confusion. His silence is heavier than any argument he could have made. It is the silence of a man who has seen the fire before and is refusing to let the world burn again, just for a paycheck. The silence in the hangar stretches until it becomes uncomfortable. A thick, suffocating tension that makes it hard for the junior staff to breathe. Isabella feels a prickle of genuine unease crawling up her spine. The man's refusal to speak, his refusal to even acknowledge her wealth or her generosity, is unnerving to a woman who is used to buying silence or applause with a single stroke of a pen. "What's the matter?" she laughs, song her voice sounds forced, hollow, and defensive. "Is one house not enough for a man of your unique talents? Fine. Let's make it high houses. A mansion in the hills for you and a beach house for the boy. I'll even throw in a luxury car to match. I'll make you a millionaire before the clock strikes 1. Just touch the engine, turn a screw, and make it stop shaking so I can leave this place and get to my meeting. Why are you just standing there like a statue?" Ryan finally speaks, and his voice is like cold iron hitting a stone floor. 2 words that stop every heart in the room. "I won't touch it." The chief engineer lets out a sharp, nervous laugh. "See? I told you. He's a fraud." He looked at the complexity of the X900 turbines and realized his little wrench won't help him here. He's scared because he knows he's out of his league, and he doesn't want to be sued when he fails under pressure. The other technicians nod, whispering about unqualified labor and liability risks. They want him to be a coward, because if he isn't, then they are the failures. Ryan ignores the insults, his gaze never leaving Isabella's eyes. "I won't touch it, because if I fix it the way you want, fast, cheap, and just enough to get you to your meeting, you will die before you reach the city skyline. And I don't work for ghosts. I've seen enough of them to last 10 lifetimes. I've heard their voices in the static of a cockpit recorder, and I won't add yours to the list." Ryan walks with a slow, deliberate purpose to the back of the main rotor assembly, his eyes scanning the mechanical joints with an expert's precision. He reaches up and points a grease-stained finger at a tiny, almost invisible area near the secondary coupling, where the paint has slightly discolored into a faint brownish hue. the sign of extreme localized friction heat. "You have a rotor head harmonic imbalance," he says, his voice gaining a terrifying, quiet authority that silences the room. "It doesn't show up on your static tests or your digital diagnostics because your sensors are programmed to ignore low-frequency noise to prevent false alarms during high-wind starts. Your software is lying to you because you told it you wanted to fly at any cost, not because the aircraft is safe. You've tuned your filters to hide the truth so you can stay on schedule." He turns to the chief engineer, his eyes cold. "You replaced the dampeners last month, didn't you? But you used the 40 series instead of the 42s because they were in stock and close enough." Well, close enough creates a resonance loop at exactly 194 hertz. It's like a singer hitting the perfect note to shatter glass. But the glass in this case is your main mast. The hangar goes deathly quiet. Even the hum of the industrial air conditioning seems to fade away. Evan looks at his father, realizing that for the first time in a decade, his dad is back in that place, the place of ultimate responsibility that he tried so hard to leave behind to protect his own peace. Ryan isn't a contractor anymore. He is the lead engineer again. "He's lying!" The chief engineer suddenly screams, his voice cracking with a desperate, high-pitched fear. "The data is clean. We've run the simulations 100 times. This man is just a con artist trying to extort more money with a horror story. He's trying to hijack your schedule, Isabella." "Check the raw vibration logs from the last 3 test flights," Ryan says. His voice remains unnervingly calm, cutting through the chief's panic. "Don't look at the filtered averages the computer gives you to make the board feel good. Look at the raw peaks in the third-order harmonics. Look at the data between 180 and 200 hertz. That's Noi the ghost is hiding, laughing at your sensors. If you look at the raw waveforms, you'll see a sawtooth pattern that shouldn't be there." A junior engineer, a young man barely out of university whose conscience hasn't been completely eroded yet, quickly taps at his tablet with trembling fingers. He bypasses the executive dashboard and pulls up the unfiltered raw telemetry data, his eyes scanning the jagged waves of numbers. His face slowly drains of all color until he looks like a ghost himself. He looks up at Isabella, his hand shaking so hard the tablet nearly slips from his grip. "Isabella, he's right. The peaks are there. They've been there for a week. We thought it was background sensor noise from the hangar doors or the fuel trucks. If this bird had gone up today, we would have lost it in under 10 minutes. The mast would have snapped like a toothpick." Isabella Grant suddenly goes very still. The air seems to vanish from her lungs. She looks at the helicopter, the beautiful, expensive, gleaming machine she was about to climb into, and suddenly it doesn't look like a symbol of power anymore. It looks like a high-tech coffin, polished and waiting for its occupant. She realizes that she was seconds away from an engineering disaster that no amount of money or influence could have stopped. She looks at Ryan, seeing not a grease-stained mechanic, but the only man in the entire room who actually valued her life more than her paycheck. She sees the integrity she thought she could buy, and for the first time in years, she feels small. The atmosphere in the hangar shifts instantly from mockery to a cold, sharp, and suffocating fear. The arrogance of the elite team has evaporated like mist, leaving behind a group of men who realize they almost committed corporate manslaughter. "Stop everything," Isabella commands, her voice no longer mocking or loud, but hollow and trembling with the weight of the realization. She turns to her chief engineer, who is now staring at the floor in absolute shame, and then she turns back to Ryan. "How long, Ryan? Give me the truth, no matter how much it costs. It's not a 15-minute fix, and it's not something you can patch with a software update or a quick prayer," Ryan explains, his hands steady as he looks at the machine with a mix of pity and resolve. "You have to drop the entire transmission assembly. You have to replace the primary drive shaft, the dampers, and the coupling housing, because they've already been compromised by the stress. You have to do it manually, piece by piece, to ensure the alignment is perfect to the micron. It's a 20-hour job, minimum, and that's if we have the parts on hand and a team that actually knows how to use a wrench instead of a tablet." Isabella looks at her $18,000 watch. She thinks about the merger, the billion-dollar deal, and the legacy she was so desperate to protect at any cost. Then she looks at Ryan's son, Evan, who is watching the scene with wide, knowing eyes. She looks at the helicopter, then back at the man who just saved her life from her own hubris. "Do it," she says, her voice regaining its strength but losing its sharp, jagged edge. "Do it right. I don't care about the meeting. I'll call the board. I'll tell them I'm going to be late because I decided to live. I'll tell them the truth for once." For the first time in 10 years, Ryan Cole feels the weight of a machine he truly respects. He doesn't look at the folder of deeds Isabella is still holding, and he doesn't look at the engineers who are now waiting for his every word like disciples. He looks at Evan, and the boy is smiling, a small, proud smile that says, "That's my dad, the man who saves people." The power in the room has officially shifted. The man in the grease-stained coveralls is now the only one with the authority that matters. "All right," Ryan says, rolling up his sleeves and revealing the scars of a lifetime of honest work. "Grab the heavy jacks, the alignment lasers, and the torque wrenches. We're going to do this by the book, and we're going to do it until it's perfect, even if we stay here until the sun comes up twice." 16 hours later, the sun begins to bleed over the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the hangar floor that smells of fresh oil and hard work. The helicopter is finally whole again, every bolt torqued to perfection, every seal checked and rechecked by hand. It sits on the pad, its engines purring with a low rhythmic perfection that feels like silk against the morning air. Isabella Grant stands nearby, her expensive suit wrinkled, her hair messy from a night spent in a plastic chair, watching as Ryan performs the final safety walk-around. She hasn't slept a wink, but she looks strangely calm, as if the long night of manual labor and honest conversation had stripped away her pretenses. "You saved my life, Ryan," she says softly as he approaches her, handing him a cup of coffee. Ryan wipes his black-stained hands on a tattered rag, his movements slow with a deep exhaustion, but his eyes are clear and precise. "I saved everyone's," he replies, glancing at the pilots and the technicians who are now looking at the aircraft with a new kind of respect and fear. "That's the job. The machine doesn't care who you are, how much you have in the bank, or what meeting you have to get to. It only cares if you listen to what it's trying to tell you." Isabella pulls out a thick leather folder containing the deeds to the houses she promised. "These are yours. You earned them 100 times over last night. Please take them for your son's future." Ryan looks at the folder for a moment, seeing the luxury and the comfort it represents. Then he shakes his head and hands it back with a firm, final gesture. "I told you before, I don't need your houses. My son and I have a roof over our heads that we built with our own hands, and we have our integrity. That's more than enough for us." Isabella is stunned, her mouth opening slightly in a world where everything has a price. "Then what do you want? I owe you a debt I can never repay with money." Ryan looks at the technicians, the men who were forced to lie by a system that valued speed and profit over human lives. "Set up a safety excellence fund," Ryan says firmly, "for the mechanics, for the ones who are told to stay quiet by bosses who don't want to hear about faults. Give them the legal and financial power to say no to people like you when the machine says it's not ready. That's the only payment I'll accept." Isabella looks at him for a long time, then she slowly nods, her eyes misting over with a new kind of understanding. "Consider it done, Ryan. It will be the first thing I sign when I get to that meeting, and it will be named the Cole Foundation." Ryan takes Evan's hand, the small boy leaning tiredly but happily against his father's side. The two of them walk out of the hangar, their shadows stretching long in the morning light. They leave behind the billionaire, the luxury helicopter, and the world of mockery. They walk toward their old, beat-up truck, knowing that some things in this world can't be bought, and some silences are louder and more powerful than any roar of an engine. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe. Some silence saves lives.